Hi folks, in today's video I'll be reviewing the Absalom City of Omens book for Pathfinder 2nd edition. The folks at Paizo were kind enough to send us over a copy, and I've had a flip through and read through a number of the sections, so here are my thoughts on this giant book. So first off, let's start with the size. So this is like 400-ish pages, so you get a lot of stuff in here, and most of it is, I mean, there's the gorgeous artwork that you always have in the Paizo books, but most of it is like, it's text. It's a lot of text with a couple of illustrations, some sidebars. Pretty much on every page has a sidebar, and there's just a ton of info in here. You also get a full fold-out map of the city in this book. So for the 55 US that this sells for, you really get kind of a lot of bang for your buck. So to start off, this is essentially a nice city overview of Absalom. It starts out with 70 pages of an overview of the city, so that goes over the history, the different districts, the key NPCs, what the culture is like, what trade and commerce is like, the politics, as well as just kind of some miscellaneous other things. So that first 70 pages gives you a really good overview, and this is something that I could see as a game master definitely want to read if you are going to set a game in Absalom. And then also this is something that you can potentially have your players read those first 70 pages to get familiar with the city, depending on, how much their character may or may not know. The bulk of this book is going over the locations within each district, as well as the key NPCs. There are over 250 different locations and 400 NPCs, so that's a lot of info. Now, to help with kind of getting through that info or finding the correct information you need, I do really like that at the beginning of kind of the district section, they do have an index that breaks down all of the locations alphabetically and lists kind of what district they're in. But even kind of more so, I think, is a great index is the type index. So this breaks down all of your different, like a blacksmith, fun bars, merchants, markets, temples, all of those things, which I think as a game master being able to look at it and say, okay, my players say they want to find the closest bar. What are the bars? I can go look at that page. That's a page that I think if you're running a game in Absalom and you pick up this book, put some kind of tab or bookmark on that page, because it's going to be a page you reference a lot. And yes, very useful. Good job, Paizo. I also like that Paizo has these different symbols on all of the sidebars, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a cheat into what the sidebar is going to be talking about. There are a couple of sidebars that give you ideas for adventure hooks. This is not a adventure guide. This is not going to give you, here's the session, here's the encounters. This is really a city guide. So if you're wanting to set something in Absalom, you can know what's there, who's there, how things kind of interact, and you can build your adventures off of that. Now, there aren't adventure hooks for every single location. That would probably be a bit much, but there seems to be at least one or two for each district. I'm not going to break down all of the different districts within this book, but it does feel like there is a nice variety. This is a huge city, so your players can spend an entire campaign really in this city very easily. And each district does have kind of its own slightly unique feel, but it all does feel cohesive within the same city. Each location has a type as well as traits, and these affect kind of different things your players can do at those locations, especially if they meet and have a helpful NPC that's there. So sometimes it makes it easier to retrain. Sometimes you can sell things for a little bit higher of a profit. And each of these is broken down. This is another page that I think is really useful to bookmark, because I know for me, I'm not going to necessarily memorize all of those things. So being able to go back to see, okay, here's where it lists the type and traits under the location. Let me go and refresh what that means, especially if it's a trait or a type that you aren't kind of using over and over. Maybe it's a location that your players really only go to once or twice, versus kind of their like home stomping grounds. Having those types makes it a little bit easier so that they're not having to repeat kind of the same info, as far as like, yeah, if there's somebody there that likes your party and will help them out, they will give you this. It just applies it for every single thing. So it's not regurgitating so much of that same information. The artwork in this book gives you a nice feel of what some of the different people that live in the city, what some of the different buildings look like, and just kind of a general feel for the different districts, which I definitely like. The maps are pretty basic. They kind of fit in the usual Paizo style of just this overview, and they do have the kind of key locations that the book breaks down marked on the map. Now, there are a whole bunch more buildings on those maps that aren't mapped or aren't marked as specific locations. So those can be things that you as a game master get to fill in, whether they are residential or maybe another shop that you can throw in. There is a page towards the beginning of the book where you can roll a percentile dice, and it gives you like a nice little prompt for the name of the shop, a little bit about it, and then kind of maybe a potential adventure hook on it. And I like this idea as additional things you can kind of plop into the city and aren't as fleshed out. So you as the game master can definitely flesh those things out. Or you can just kind of generate something of your own and plop it into some of these other empty buildings, or maybe not empty, but not labeled buildings. Each district has its own chapter, and at the beginning gives you a nice overview of that district, as well as a breakdown of kind of the key information you need to know about that. So who's the district council, who's the district watch, who are the key NPCs, and what kind of services does this district offer. And then it goes into a little bit more depth about the district, and then breaks down kind of each of the key locations within these districts. Big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Joan. If you want to support our channel, you can head on over to patreon.com and check out the perks of being a patron. All right, let's get back to the review. Now let's talk about the NPCs that are included in this book. You are not going to get full character sheets for 400 NPCs. That would be a massive book, and probably you aren't going to need character sheets for most of the NPCs that your characters are interacting with. Instead, it gives you the name, some very basic info about them, like their ancestry and level and class. And then it gives you kind of a brief description that tells you a little bit about that NPC, about kind of what role they play, any important interactions they have, and it also lists kind of what location that NPC is associated with. Now, I do think that including the basic info as far as like the ancestry, class, and level is super helpful, because then if you do have a NPC that you want to have as an ally that you want to have a full character sheet, or maybe they are a nemesis that you want a full character sheet in case you run into combat, or to know kind of flesh out more of their abilities, it gives you that information that you can build off of. And in some ways that might actually be more helpful than giving you a full character sheet, because as you're crafting your adventure, you can look at it and say, okay, if I'm doing a druid that's level 10, it would actually be more helpful for me, for the story I want to tell, if they take these kinds of spells rather than these kinds of spells. Or I'm creating a villain, so I want to make sure I'm creating something that my players can potentially go up against. And so, yes, making some of those choices on the smaller scale character, you can do that and not feel like, oh, I'm having to rewrite an entire character sheet. you get to generate it. And then at the end, there are kind of 2 additional sections that give some nice bonus stuff. There's a adventurer toolbox that has some new weapons as well as some interesting drugs that are available in the city. There are really only 1 or 2 new weapons, and these are because they are kind of associated with a new ancestry, which is the last section, which is the Azkarati. Might be mispronouncing that. This is kind of a slightly more aquatic ancestry that still lives on the land, but they have like gills and fins as kind of remnants of their more aquatic ancestors. This guidebook will fit with kind of any of the additional Pathfinder 2nd edition supplements, but especially any of the Lost Omens setting books or additional like spell books, all of that stuff. Yeah, and if you're looking for a great kind of city guide and you want to run a city campaign, but you don't want to have to come up with everything from scratch, I do think that this is a great guidebook to pick up. So, have you picked up the Absalom City of Lost Omens book? Do you have any thoughts on it? I'd love to hear them down below. Are you setting a campaign, or have you set a campaign in Absalom? I know it's one that kind of came over from Pathfinder 1st edition and I think Starfinder also references Absalom, but that's a like star station or forgetting the word. Space station, not star station, space station, rather than a city, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. Yeah, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!